Hello everyone! Here it is, the fourth and final video of spooky mini movie reviews. Thanks for joining me as I blitz through as many films as I can. My mom asked me a couple weeks ago if I was planning to put on my cape for any of the videos this month, and I was like, I hadn't really been planning on it. But it is the season to dig it out of storage, and as it turns out, I am going to cover some movies here that have characters wearing capes, so it seems only appropriate. It is a little bit dusty. This is a lot harder to get into than I anticipated. Capes are complicated, guys. You think you just toss it over your shoulders and you call it a day? No. Oh, because this one's actually, much shorter. Movie number 1 is a viewer recommendation, the 1968 version of Dracula, starring Denholm Elliott. This British TV production sticks to the middle section of Bram Stoker's iconic novel, which I'm okay with. That's generally considered the meat and potatoes section of the book. Based on other things I've seen him in, Denholm Elliott struck me as a surprising choice for Count Dracula, but he was fine. I just couldn't help thinking every time I saw him, wow, I can't believe he's playing Dracula. This does feel like a patchwork of past and future adaptations. There are things 1931 and 1958 had done, but also things that were later echoed in 1979 and 1992. There are some interesting creative choices. Lucy Westenra's last name is shortened to Weston. The film is only about an hour long, but they still allow time for Dracula to rant about his ancestors. And as has been the case in multiple versions now, Jonathan Harker and Renfield are melded into one character who is played by Corin Redgrave. He's good, Lucy's good, albeit over the top, Mina and Dr. Seward are pretty good, Van Helsing is standard. There is quite a bit more sensuality in this than I would have expected from a minor, old TV production like this. And it's apparent that the filmmakers side with the interpretation that the whole thing is just a metaphor, as the vampire experience is clearly depicted as ecstatic for both the biter and the bitee. Overall, I appreciate the effort to infuse the old story with some fresh ideas and visuals. I've seen an awful lot of Dracula adaptations, and this does bring some new stuff to the table. But it doesn't displace my favorites, which are 1931, 1979, and 1958. And to be honest, I think those are the only Dracula films I really like. Movie number 2 is 1966's Island of Terror. On a remote isle off the coast of Ireland, a reclusive scientist's experiments to cure cancer lead to a string of mysterious deaths. What makes them so mysterious? The corpses have no bones. Produced by Planet Film Productions, this boasts 2 Hammer Horror alumni, director Terence Fisher and star Peter Cushing. Actually, while Cushing receives top billing, he's more of a co-star to leading man Edward Judd. But Cushing, who is as lovely as ever, gets all the best lines. My mom and I really enjoyed this one. It's got strong build-up, likable people, lively music, good atmosphere, a secluded setting. It develops the tension nicely and uses cool sound effects, and the creepy visuals of the dead are modest but subtly disturbing. Well, the film is subtle except for this one part that was like, whoa! So it's a solid horror flick. The only drawback is the design of the creature, because when you see it, it's like, oh, that? And then for the rest of the movie, you have to try not to giggle every time it's shown. The unfortunate design may have fared better if it had been left shrouded in shadows and mist, or photographed in black and white if the movie had been made a few years earlier. As it is, you have to tell yourself the characters are reacting not so much to the thing itself, but to the knowledge that unless they get away, they will suffer a horrible, gruesome death. The good news is, even this accidentally comical element was fun, and overall, I thought this was an entertaining, thrilling, spooky film. Movie number 3 is a Polish film, or a Polish, Dutch, and German film, to be specific, 2018's Werewolf. A group of children liberated from a Nazi concentration camp find themselves trapped in a mansion in the woods without food or water and surrounded by bloodthirsty dogs. When I first came across this a couple months ago, I thought, ooh, another unique subgenre mashup, World War II and werewolves. But it's not quite what I had expected. Really Mean Dogs might have been a more accurate title than Werewolf, but it probably wouldn't have caught my attention then, and that's a silly title. This made for an absorbing, dramatic horror film. Its sense of prolonged anxiety stems as much from the grim reality within as from the canine threat without. It's kind of a reverse Lord of the Flies situation in the house, as these feral kids make a half-hearted attempt to return to civilization without reverting to the behavior that helped them survive the camp. But the scars left by years of intense brutality prove as impossible to get rid of as the tattooed numbers on their arms. All the kids were good actors and did a commendable job carrying the film. It's got some gore and violence, and the oldest girl is almost assaulted, but it's less about monsters and graphic content, more about the desperation of survival and the psychological terrors that lurk in this foreign post-war realm the children find themselves in. I admit I wasn't sure about this at first, but I ended up liking it. Movie number 4 is 1971's The Abominable Dr. Phibes. Vincent Price stars as the titular character, a deranged genius obsessed with getting revenge for the death of his wife. This cult classic is a horror film, a comedy, a detective film, and a camp extravaganza. I first heard of this one a long time ago when I was haunting Phantom of the Opera fan forums. The similarities between the two stories are numerous, so it would sometimes come up in adaptation discussions. I saw the first 40 minutes or so about a decade ago and always meant to go back and finish it. I was determined that this would be the year I finally got it done, and then, lo and behold, the day before I was planning to watch it, Turner Classic Movies aired it and its sequel on TV, and then they uploaded both of them onto their streaming app. And they're both available there until October 31st. You can tell that Vincent Price was having fun here. The role has minimal dialogue, due to the character's inability to talk unless he connects his vocal cords to a speaker, but rather than sleepwalk through the silent part, as some other actors might have done, he threw himself into it. From its opening, where Dr. Phibes plays the organ with gusto before winding up his schmaltzy animatronic band, you know this is going to be an eccentric movie. I'm not sure if the comedy is readily apparent to the first-time viewer, because you do spend quite a bit of time wondering what is going on here, but I thought it got funnier as it went on. Once you've settled into it, you start picking up on humorous things like the nonsensical placement of a telephone, the cheeky glance Phibes gives a suggestive picture, his mute sidekick's fourth wall break, and the way Phibes does a taste test by touching his finger to the back of his neck. And of course, there are the outrageous sets and costumes. It seems like at every opportunity they went with the wilder choice, picking outfits that were as eye-catching and exaggerated as possible. Dr. Phibes' outfits are zany, and his assistant, played by Virginia North, wears a variety of Follies-inspired costumes. You may be tempted to wonder, why is he wearing that? Why is she dressed that way? But the only acceptable answer is, why not? The absurdity is part of the fun, I guess, just like the random ballroom dancing interludes and the extreme murder methods. Because, oh yeah, this is a film about a serial killer. With regard to the creativity of some of the kills, this has been likened to the Saw films, which I don't watch, and I surmise that a couple of the famous torture devices from that franchise were inspired by Dr. Phibes. I think the freakiest kill is the one with the frog mask, thanks to the wise decision to let the viewer's imagination do most of the work. There's another scene, though, that's one of the funniest parts of the entire movie. It's an abrupt death that comes out of nowhere, and the two detectives are just like... Joseph Cotten co-stars as one of Dr. Phibes' potential victims. He's one of my favorite classic film actors, so that's another plus, and he looks very dapper here, I must say. All things considered, I ended up enjoying this more than I expected to, since I don't really go for camp. Price hams it up, but also makes the character compelling. There's a lot to look at and take in, there's some very good makeup, and a few decent frights, yet the film is weird and wacky enough to be more fun than scary. So naturally, movie number 5 is 1972's Dr. Phibes Rises Again. Price's Dr. Phibes returns, this time in pursuit of ancient scrolls that lead him to Egypt, hoping to bring his precious wife Victoria back to life forever. In many ways, this is very like the first film. Same style, same tone, same director, similar music, costuming, and design. Price's performance is consistent, and it picks up right where the first film left off. But for some reason, I didn't care for it. I found the story weak, and by comparison, less interesting. The kills weren't as memorable, and neither were the new characters. There was less comedy, and what there was, I didn't think was as funny. It often seemed like they were trying too hard. There were some moments that succeeded, but mostly it felt a little flat. I was pleased to see Peter Jeffrey back as Inspector Trout, as I particularly enjoyed his scenes in the first one, and curiously, Hugh Griffith and Terry Thomas also returned in new roles. Peter Cushing got his name added to the roster, but don't get too excited. His appearance is brief and of so little consequence, it's almost not worth mentioning. There are two major additions. One is Robert Quarry co-starring as a man equally obsessed with finding a mythological key to eternal life, and Valley Kemp debuts as Phibes' doting new assistant, replacing Virginia North in the silent, fashionable accomplice role. This time, the part seems mostly decorative, and despite all her flitting around in diaphanous gowns, I think Kemp lacks the screen presence, the certain something alluring but daunting that her predecessor had. Obviously, if you're inclined to try any Dr. Phibes film, you're going to start with the first one, and if you really like that, if you're really into it, then sure, go ahead and watch the second. But I felt it was the inferior film, and in hindsight, I would just as soon have skipped it. On a side note, too many snakes! Movie number 6 is 1992's Intruders, in which the disconcerting experiences of two unrelated women start to raise questions about the possibility of alien abduction. This was a 2-part TV miniseries produced and directed by Dan Curtis, and I liked it a lot, more than some of his more popular, more famous productions. It stars Richard Crenna as a skeptical psychiatrist, with Mare Winningham and Daphne Ashbrook as the women going through strange, unexplainable things. The miniseries, which by the way has been uploaded to YouTube as one 2-hour 42-minute video, is very well done. It takes a serious, sensitive approach, and while it utilizes some clever editing and artistic lighting and camera work, its greatest strength lies in the acting. Whether or not you're inclined to buy the abduction theory, you are compelled to feel for these characters in their trauma and fear. And they're not the only ones suffering, as those closest to them are drawn into the painful situation as well. Supposedly this was inspired by real-life accounts, and alien abduction aficionados will pick up on all the classic trademarks, but there are also whispers of conspiracy within the government, where concerted efforts are made to bury the truth. So essentially this touches the same ground as The X-Files, but it predates the X-Files pilot episode by a year and a half. Anyway, I thought it was good stuff. a tad long, but for the most part it doesn't feel drawn out, and it is creepy. And movie number 7 is 2015's Hidden. This suspenseful horror film focuses on a family of 3 eking out an existence in an old fallout shelter, unable to visit the surface because there are things out there hunting them. This doesn't seem to be a super well-known film. It's certainly a somewhat modest production, with a small cast, limited effects, minimalistic sets. Most of it is contained in the dark, dank, dusty shelter. Alexander Skarsgård and Andrea Riseborough play the parents, desperately trying to keep their daughter safe. The little girl was, a little irritating sometimes. She's another kid with attitude who looks 8 but acts 13. But you've got to understand that these are unusual circumstances and she's been through a lot. There are a couple instances where people make poor decisions. As my mom put it, these characters wouldn't survive that quiet movie. But the film does a good job keeping things spooky and mysterious. It's all about atmosphere and mood and making you wait a long time to get some answers. If you're someone who grows impatient with slow burn horror films where you scarcely ever see anything, you might have a hard time with this. I was starting to feel a bit underwhelmed at a certain point, like there wasn't enough here that made it different from a score of other movies. That doesn't mean I wasn't enjoying it, I like this kind of thing, but it was missing something special. And then it went in a new direction. I won't give anything away, I don't even want to mention what kind of adversary they're up against. I went into it without a clue, and I think it was better that way. I'll just say they threw in some clever ideas that freshened up the story and took me by surprise. Thus ends this mini-review month's experiment. I tried to get to as many films on my list as possible, and for the most part I succeeded. I did get to all the movies that I prioritized. There are still a couple outliers that I'd like to try to squeeze in before the month is over, and if I do manage to do that, you'll get to hear about them in next week's video, which will be what else I saw in October. Yes, there are more movies I saw that I didn't talk about here, pretty much all the non-spooky ones that we watched with my dad, who is not into this kind of thing. I hope you enjoyed this video. You can find the films and how I watched them listed in the description. Let me know your thoughts on any of these movies if you've seen them in the comments below. I look forward to hearing from you, and I will be back next week. Thanks for watching.